All right, we're back again. What episode is this now? What are we?
11.
Woo! 11. You guys have joined us for 11 episodes. We're back again. This is Coximus. Got the Great White Rhino and Edward, Alec Dan,
AKA the Lumpia God.
AKA
Lumpia God.
Lumpia God. On this episode,
AKA Squatty Potty.
hey, those work, man.
I've heard.
Great things. Today's episode, we're going to talk about communication and language as a trainer, as a coach, as an athlete, and all the things that come along with it. So to get us started, Edward?
So first things first, one of the most important tools that we can use in training and understanding our training is being able to define what we're doing in words that are consistent. So that we're using terms that are consistent as we communicate to ourselves, as we reflect on our own training, so that when a squat or a training session goes well, we can clearly define as best as we can why that went well. So for example, I really focused on setting my tripod foot when I squat, and then I balanced over midfoot, and I noticed that when I did that, my squat went well, versus, you know, I just kind of balanced there and floated around in space, and sometimes the squat went well, and sometimes it didn't. I don't really know why, but I kind of just like pray to Jesus every time I come into squat, and I hope that it goes well. And if we can define these terms and establish a framework to understand our training, to understand our lifts, to understand how we respond to everything, and that is how we can make these results more predictable and repeatable. And it's like one thing to just have those terms for you as a lifter, as an athlete, that you write down in your journal every time. But if you want to have meaningful conversation with your teammates, so that when you say tripod foot and you're saying it to this other athlete who has this idea of tripod foot, those ideas match up, and there isn't this disconnect that is semantic in nature, so that ideas can spread as clearly and concisely as possible. And then on top of that, we're all coaches here and we coach athletes, and if what we're saying to the athlete, like, it makes sense to us because we're coaches, but if our athlete hasn't been explained the ideas of what is a tripod foot, how do you set it? What is bouncing over midfoot? How do you define that? Is it this line that cuts your foot in half exactly, and if you deviate by half an inch, your knees are going to explode, or is it totally fine that there's some deviation? Like, what is a neutral low back? What are all these terms that we throw around when we explain technique? If the athlete understands that, they can communicate that to the coach, and the coach can make adjustments that will have predictable results. Whereas if you ask your athlete how'd your squat feel, and they don't have a language to explain what's going on, they won't know what to say. So all they're going to say is, you know, it felt good, or, you know, that session didn't really go that well. That session was pretty bad. And that's the extent of their explanation, because they do not have the language to explain themselves.
Yeah, very common.
So a way we can consider this is, it's like some of the people who come into the gym, they may be in their late 20s, 30s, 40s. We got someone who's in their 70s training in here, right? But their training age in the weight room, they may have only been strength training for 3 months, 4 months. So even though they're older, they have the cognitive faculties to use language outside of the gym. Realistically, in the gym, their developmental age is very young. So we can compare it to babies, right? When babies throw a temper tantrum because they don't know how to speak words, they just scream and they thrash about and they do all that because they don't have language to explain themselves. Whereas when you're older and you're angry, you can swear and you can say all these mean things to people, and you can express yourself more elaborately because you have language to back it up. So in training, when things get frustrating and you don't know how to explain yourself, what do? You bang your head against the rack, you take more caffeine, you get really angry, and you hope that helps, because you don't have a framework to understand what to do in the moment. You don't have an answer. And this goes back to our mental toughness thing. If you have a language to understand what's going right, what's going wrong, then you can meaningfully direct your focus to those things to try to enact some sort of positive change, versus just getting angry and feeling like, oh, I'm a piece of crap, I don't know what to do, but mama didn't raise a wiener, so I'm gonna do this, right? I'm gonna get this shit done. And for us, we want to have answers when we come into training, and the way we can do that is by establishing a common language.
I'm gonna raise a wiener. That's why you're here, bro.
I didn't raise no wiener. Oh,
So-
And this language he's talking about, that you want to have commonalities from athlete to coach, and just in the gym, it doesn't have to be some fancy expert language where you're using all these big fancy words and using the muscle names scientifically and everything like that. If you can develop a language that's very, very simple but effective, that's where you're going to get really good results from, and it's going to be easy to transfer from athlete to coach, and so forth and so on.
So in the context of a training session, right? When a person's lifting, they don't want to have 3 sentences spewed at them after they've unracked the squat before they descend in their squat. They want to hear one thing like, big breath, or get really tight. And then after that, once they've cooled down and they have 400 pounds off of their back, then you could tell them, oh, the reason why we're cueing big breath is because this relates to your abs and your obliques and your core tightness and breathing and bracing with your diaphragm, and how that relates to you feeling tightness in your glutes and balancing over midfoot and all these things. And we have this larger theoretical framework to explain. But in the moment, we don't want to explain all that. We just want to distill it down to one word, like breath or tight or knees or elbows. Or
Hips!
Something really simple, right?
I would like to be holding my breath while unracked or squat, as you say all of that at once, and see if I don't fall asleep before I go down.
Yeah. So there's a time and place to explain and to use our language, but if all we're doing is yelling to a lifter, hips, 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 and hoping that something clicks in them, even though you have had no discussion with the athlete at all about what does hips mean? What do you want me to do when you yell hips? Are you just trying to make me stand up straight, or are you trying to make me drive my hips forward, or are you trying to make me squeeze my glutes together to stabilize my hips or something? What do you mean when you yell hips? And if you don't establish that, then you're just filling this person who's lifting their headspace with this really loud volume that can distract them from successfully executing what they're trying to do.
You could be saying pancakes and they get the same effect from it. You can just scream pancakes.
Yeah.
You're just confusing them.
So the reason why we want to establish language first and as a component of training as a skill is that it's something you can work on. It's something you can more clearly define over time, and it's something you can practice every time you come into the gym if you train in a gym atmosphere. Because we have conversations when we train. There are people around us who are training also. And if we can have more of our conversation about our training and less about how hammered we got last week, or how stressed out I am about money, or how my dog barfed all over my bed, and instead think of, you know what, I'm squatting right now, I want to focus on my knee tracking, and this person over here, they understand the language too, and we're going to talk to each other, and we're going to feed off of each other, and we're both going to build our technique faster, because we're not just in our little isolation bubble and training in our own little world. We have other people we can bounce ideas off of, who can watch our squat while we're squatting, so I don't only have to rely on my training footage that I have to look at every single time between sets. I have another human being who I can bounce ideas off of.
But if you're a lone wolf, you don't ask anyone anything.
But if you're a lone wolf and all your lifting is mental, and it's all music and arousal and death metal and just being really angry, and that's working for you, that's totally fine. But if you come into the gym and you see the value in being around teammates who speak the same language as you, who can help you, who you trust to help you, and you trust them because you know that they've been through something similar to what you've been through, and the initial learning process of learning what is breathing and bracing, what is a core exactly, what is the technique in a squat, technique in the bench press, technique in the deadlift, so on and so forth. So I can trust that what feedback this person gives me, there's some value in it, because I can't watch myself in the moment, but this person is. And not only that, they watch me lift every single time I come in, because we train at the same time, and they've seen my technique before, and they see my technique now, and they can oftentimes give me more valuable feedback than my coach gives me.
Absolutely.
That's fair.
So we've talked about some terms in this series. The first episode was on internal versus external load. After that, we talked about mental toughness. After that, we talked about auto-regulation. And then after that, last week, Cox talked about, he told us a little bit about his injuries and how even pain, which is this scientific term, is ambiguous, and how we have productive pain and we have unproductive pain.
No pain, no gain.
So So even in the realm of science, which we think is, oh, it's this thing that is really objective and it is as true as can possibly be, in our coaches meetings at Chalk It Up, last week we talked about a paper that looked at muscle extensibility, so sort of how stretchy a muscle is before and after stretching, and if it had an effect. And in the realm of science, there was not even a consensus on the definition of what is muscle extensibility. Some people defined it as how much torque there was at the end of some sort of measurement, and another one was the sensory feedback of like how far can you stretch. And those two are different, and they yielded different results, even though if you took the measurements from one, it would be the same as the other. The way you defined it made them have a different output. So this is a long-winded way of saying, it's like even science has trouble defining their terms, but they're trying. So that's the first step. If you can define your terms and then communicate that with the people around you, that's good. And then if you can define those terms in more objective things, so say defining below parallel as crease of the hip is below the top of the knee, as defined by your pelvic anatomy, that would be even more helpful versus just saying, oh, I just squat until I kind of stop and I feel like I'm really tight and I come back up and that's my full range of motion, versus investigating a little more thoroughly and adjusting position of your pelvis and how that relates to how deep you can squat. If you can do that for everything, for as many of the terms that you have in the gym as possible, that is how we can work toward training as productively as possible without like filling space with bullshit.
Yeah. Filter it out.
So you want to talk about
communicating with your coach a little bit? Sorry, I'm stuck on pancakes. I'm super hungry and I'm sitting at a restaurant right now. I mentioned pancakes earlier, but communicating with your coach, big thing. We talked about internal and external feedback. Communicating with your coach obviously is a big thing with training. Your coach communicating with you is also a big thing that comes with training. Personally, as a trainer, I try and check up with clients once a week, usually the weekend, just to see how the week went if they're not meeting with me. Make sure their body's feeling okay, recovery's going good, we're not overworking them or anything like that. But also having your clients, establishing that common language, letting you know if there's any problems, and letting you know if they're going to take time off or switch days around or move exercises if something didn't feel right. It's very important for an athlete to communicate, to get the top end results that they're looking for. You don't want to come in the gym, have a program, spend money on it monthly, and then kind of go through it with half the effort, or I didn't communicate with them, I'm just going to skip the next couple days, we'll talk in a couple days. It's just it's not really the answer if you're looking for top quality working out.
You get more bang out of your buck.
That's a simple way to put it.
If you just communicate things a little bit better with your coach. If you're spending I was waiting for it.
So if you want to talk about the soldier mentality, it's like give me the plan, I'll execute no matter what, and like
sorry, that's our church bell.
And like how that is anti-communication.
The soldier mentality. Yeah.
Soldier.
Once this bell's done, we can continue this phenomenal talk.
Yeah,
here.
just like if you were going to pay for anything with your own money, school, whatever it is, you're not going to waste your own time and your own money doing it.
So there's something called the soldier mentality, which is like, you give me this plan, I'll execute it no matter what, even if my hip's going to fall off or I'm bleeding out my ass for squats or whatever it may be, it's getting executed, it does not matter. And that can kind of, almost hinder progress in a way sometimes. If you have things going on and you can communicate those a little bit better to your coach, the plan can be adjusted, things can be adjusted, numbers can be moved up or down depending on how things are going. And you, like I said, it's just going to be, you're going to get more bang out of your buck doing it that way and progress a lot faster doing it that way than just, I got this thing, I'm going to do it no matter what because he gave it to me, so here we go.
And it's very easy too if you do have a problem in a workout or things aren't going right that day or you have pain or whatever. It's very easy with the way we kind of program a coach to adjust it on the fly. Like we can give you at least something to kind of adjust what you're doing, usually pretty quickly. And then if there needs to be more action later, whether it's a one-on-one later or adjusting the whole program, that can be done.
And this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where like if you're a child or a baby and you don't have the faculties for language, then you're just going to throw a temper tantrum. If you're this person who's lifting and you're given a program and you paid money for it, but you don't have the language to explain what is like bothering you while you're training, and you're just so prideful about your training, and you have it, you're going to execute it, and you're not going to tell your coach how difficult it is at all because you're a tough person, right? Then like that prevents you from communicating how we can optimize the training. And it's like, even though you're able to get it done, the role of the coach is to optimize your training. So if you can communicate these things on a frequent basis to the coach, then that process can be as smooth as possible. So just because the training is tough and you're gritting your teeth every time you come in, doesn't mean that it's a good program. Because again, we can give anyone 5 sets of 30 on the leg press and they're going to be gritting their teeth by the end of it. It's not hard to give a person a really difficult, tough program, but what it is difficult to do is to match the training that an athlete has to what they're capable of. And the way that we can make that process as smooth as possible is again, with language, with communication.
And to bounce back on the communication thing as well, what I've noticed, at least for me, I know a few other coaches do it around here that I know, but meeting with your clients beforehand, before you start programming for them or start working with them at all, what I like to run is little success sessions, is what I call it. They're free 30-minute sessions, and you can kind of establish that common language. You can talk about goals, you can explain your services and what you can give to that athlete, and that's a good, at least, foot in the door to kind of establish that common ground.
That's a good point, because it's so often that you find a coach and it's like, oh, this is a really good powerlifting coach, and I'm going to enter their world, and they're going to impose all their goals on me. Versus, it's like, I'm a human being and I have these goals, and I'm going to come to this person who's an expert, and I'm going to hire them to help me reach my goals. And if you can meet the athlete where they are at, learn what their worldview is, learn the language that they use to understand their training, then you can bring them to the understanding that you have, or you can sort of bridge that gap between the two. Versus, oh, you paid me, here's a book with all these terms in it, memorize it, and then come back to me next week after you've memorized it all, and then we can speak.
There's going to be a test. Don't worry.
It's not school. This is training, and there's an intelligent way we can go about this that doesn't feel like school. However, to circle back to the very beginning, language.
It's like a circle.
Like a second.
Language is important in understanding your training, and something that we've noticed, because we coach powerlifting classes here at Chalk It Up, is that if you can explain the cues you use in teaching the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift, that not only helps these beginners and these intermediates understand their training better, but it forces you to understand training at an even deeper level, because it all makes sense in here in your brain, in like brain soup, but when you have to put it into words that connect with a person, then it takes a deeper level of understanding.
I want to say something. I could bet that majority of all of our clients could explain how to squat, bench, or deadlift to a beginner because they understand it so well. I could bet serious money on that.
I would agree.
Absolutely. One of my main goals when I teach someone squat, bench, and deadlift is, one, to teach them the correct way to do the movement and go through the workout. But also, if I can give you knowledge and you understand what you're doing, you're always going to perform better, regardless of what it is. If you understand it, you'll be better at it, and that's a big thing.
Yeah. And about teaching them how to fish, not fishing for them. So I think that that's super true. I think that a solid majority of our clients here could probably explain bench, squat, or deadlift to one of their friends very effectively.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely.
And if you sat in a lecture at any point in your life, you know what it's like to have this person just spewing words at you, and then you kind of doze off toward the end, and you're like, I retained the first 15 minutes, but there's no interaction. This isn't engaging for me, so I don't really feel like I'm going to retain this. Versus over here in our classes, at the end of classes, we ask our athletes, what were your most important cues for the day? What were you working on, and what was giving you trouble? And what do you think you could work on? So not only have they been told these cues and these things, but we don't really trust that they really get it yet. So we force them to respond and say, my squats felt all right today, but I think I was getting off balance. And then as they're sitting there trying to piece things together, they're making connections in their head, and they're thinking, ooh, my weight was a little more forward, so maybe that kind of takes me back to my midfoot, so maybe I should have shifted back a little bit. But maybe that could have also been if I could keep my back tighter, I wouldn't cave forward as much. And then they're forced to go through this process of understanding their technique and how it ties into their squat versus just being lectured at in words and back tightness, knees forward, midfoot, tripod foot. They have this tangible thing, the squat, that they just did 5 minutes ago to piece everything together for them, so they're not just looking at this very sterile diagram of a squat with, oh, here are the 5 top cues to make your squat good. They just lived it seconds ago, and now they're understanding it in language once their bodies have cooled down, their heart rate has come down, and like now they have this language framework that they can use to describe things.
Well, and as a coach too, with a beginner as well, it might not be the best idea to, have them do a squat. And when we were talking about, we asked them, what they thought about it or how they felt. Maybe give them just one thing, like how was your balance on that? How'd you feel about that? And giving them things at a piece at a time instead of bombarding them with, well, how was your tripod foot? You think your knee tracking was on? Were your hips active? And all this stuff, because then they're going to kind of lose their train of thought, especially when they don't understand what they're doing fully yet or are super confident or comfortable with it.
So final piece, that's all language done well, and language can also be done poorly, or it can be taken advantage of. So the examples we have of this, we don't have to name anything, but it's like if you have your sort of proprietary blend of a training system where you have these words that are like really cool tribal signifiers, where you have these cool acronyms that are really catchy and they're easy to remember, and then you decide to sell a weekend course on it. And like coaches who take this course, they're hip, they're trendy, and they know these cool terms now, even though those terms haven't really been substantiated in science or in the current literature. So just be aware that there are people who define these terms, but they don't hold themselves to that higher level of scientific scrutiny, which may or may not be like deliberately deceitful. However, it's like, yes, define your terms, but ground those terms in something real and not in this like world of make-believe.
Well, that too, when you have a client, new or old, usually people when they come into a gym, they're looking for a coach, they're looking for a program, they're looking for some guidance. And if you're just going to spew off a bunch of scientific and really big words about the musculoskeletal system and all that kind of stuff, like acetabular, you think the 95% of people are really going to understand that? You need to put things in kind of layman's terms, unless that person understands what you're talking about. But usually simple language that's effective, that can be used for a multitude of things, is going to be a better route for people who don't understand, what a coach goes through or what they're learning. They're not studying that. That's why they're coming to you.
Speak with language of your tribe.
Absolutely.
And one of the easiest ways we can make this process as smooth as possible is with language. So not only am I going to explain these terms to you, but I'm going to ask you, like if this is your first time in the gym, what are your thoughts on strength training? What do you think you have to do to get stronger? What are your thoughts on technique in the bench press and the squat? Do you believe because your uncle benched and he only benched to 90 degrees at his elbows that if he went any further he was going to hurt his shoulder or something? Or if he squatted below 90 degrees in the squat, something would explode or something? And if we don't have that prior information, we're kind of just guessing every time you come in. I mean, we're always just guessing, but that is an extra layer of uncertainty that we can clear up by having conversations, by being human beings, having relationships with one another, and communicating with one another, and not just having these transactional relationships where give me money, I'm gonna spew some words at you, I'm gonna count to 10, and then you give me the money, and then you get stronger, and that's it. That's the extent of our relationship.
Or you don't get stronger, and then just throw a bunch of big words that you make feel stupid.
Yeah.
Either way is fine.
Or is like, do you actually want to make strength training an important part of your life that enriches your life and the relationships that you have in powerlifting enrich your life? Or do you just come to the gym and you kind of, I don't want these people, I'm just going to do my things, add 5 pounds to my total and get out of here and
post a picture of my ass and get the fuck out of here.
And that's it.
Oh, heck yeah, 200,000 followers, here we come.
Humans use language for a purpose, so we ought to apply it here too.
That's a good concluding thought right there.
I think that's a good conclusion.
Boom.
Boom.
Take us away.
That's it for today, episode 11, Language and Communication. Hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Once again, signing off. You can find us here at Chalk It Up. You can email us, info@chalkitupstrength.com. You can come into the gym. You can find me on Instagram _Coxsmith_. Where can they find you?
The Great White Rhino on Instagram.
And you can find me on Instagram at JRAlekdan. So by the time you listen to this, our powerlifting classes have begun.
Yes, I'm excited.
If you want to check them out,
Yeah.
just come by the gym at night.
Don't let it
Just show up. The
Show.
door's open.
Yep, always. Not
Until
always.
next time.
Close. I like when they're less formal.
3, 2, 1.